The rain had been relentless for days, swallowing roads, homes, and lives in the small town of Miller's Creek. Most had evacuated. But as Sergeant Daniel Hayes trudged through the rising floodwaters with his K9, Shadow, something stopped them cold, a desperate scream swallowed by the wind. Then came the whimpering bark, the pull on Daniel's sleeve. Shadow had heard something, or someone. And what they found beneath the collapsing barn changed everything. Sergeant Daniel Hayes had seen combat zones, but nothing felt quite like this, the silence that followed chaos. Miller's Creek wasn't just flooded, it was drowning. The once quiet farming town was now an ocean of swirling debris, uprooted fences, and shattered memories. Daniel moved cautiously through the waist-deep water, his boots long since submerged, the weight of his gear dragging with each heavy step. Shadow, his black German shepherd, swam beside him with practiced ease, occasionally paddling to rest his paws on floating wreckage. The rain hadn't stopped for 4 days. Roads were gone. Cell towers were down. And the evacuation orders had come too late for many. Daniel had been sent by the National Guard as part of a last sweep, to make sure no one was left behind. He didn't expect to find anyone. Not alive, anyway. Shadow froze. Daniel followed his line of sight, the outline of a barn just ahead, half its roof missing, the siding peeled off by wind and water. A sagging structure at the best of times, now it looked ready to collapse into the current. Then Shadow growled low, not the growl of warning, but of urgency. "What is it, boy?" Daniel whispered. Shadow barked once, hard. Then again. And then he took off, not swimming, but dragging through the current with purpose. Daniel cursed and followed, water rising to his chest. As they reached the barn's edge, Shadow clawed at floating boards, circling tight in one spot. Then came something else, a sound Daniel didn't expect. A voice. Faint. Frantic. Help. It wasn't imagined. It wasn't the wind. It was real. A child's voice, from inside the barn. "Shadow, search." Daniel barked. The dog didn't hesitate. With a loud splash, Shadow climbed over debris and vanished into the barn's darkness. Daniel hauled himself up onto the wooden beams, flashlight in hand, heart pounding. The beam cut through the dark, revealing a hellscape, overturned hay bales, broken beams, water lapping at the rafters. Then something moved. A small hand. Barely above the surface. Fingers clutched weakly at floating splinters. Daniel leapt. The water inside was colder than outside. He swam hard, reaching the child just as she slipped under again. Shadow had her sleeve in his teeth, holding her up. Daniel pulled her in, one arm around her chest, dragging them both toward the open wall. She was shivering, blue-lipped, eyes wide with terror. He wrapped her in his poncho, voice low. "You're safe now. What's your name?" The girl clung to his collar and whispered, "Emily." Daniel's breath caught. That name, he had seen it scrawled on the emergency board back at the fire station. Missing, Emily. Age 7. Last seen near the Miller barn. The barn. This barn. She wasn't supposed to be alive. The sun had barely broken through the thick clouds by the time Daniel and Shadow reached the edge of Miller's Creek. What was once a calm and scenic stream had now become a wide, churning beast, angry with runoff from days of relentless rain. Entire sections of the forest trail were submerged. Fallen trees floated like corpses down the current. And overhead, the sky still carried that heavy, swollen gray that promised more to come. Daniel gripped the lead strap to Shadow's harness. The black German shepherd was tense, ears forward, nose twitching. "Track, boy," Daniel said softly. Shadow took off with purpose, nose low, paws light and fast on the mud-soaked ground. Emily's house had been one of the first in the lower district to flood. The back door was still wide open when Daniel checked it earlier, furniture overturned, muddy water lapping at the kitchen floor. No signs of her mother. No signs of Emily. Just the teddy bear. Soaked, slumped against the porch rail. As if waiting. Daniel's boots splashed through the rising puddles as he kept up with Shadow. His radio crackled with updates from the volunteer teams, some combing rooftops, others navigating the flood with kayaks and makeshift rafts. But none had seen the girl. He stopped at the base of a collapsed footbridge. The other side led toward the old orchard, an area the town had mostly stopped using since the fruit trees died out. Shadow barked, sharp and urgent. "She's close?" Daniel muttered. Shadow growled low, then moved toward a small hill where the floodwaters hadn't reached yet. There was a break in the brush, an unnatural one, like something had pushed through recently. A path. Not animal. Not random. He followed. A child's jacket, pink, torn, clung to a branch. Daniel's heart clenched. He picked it up carefully, held it out to Shadow, who sniffed deeply. Then the dog barked again, a short warning call, and bolted ahead. "Shadow, wait!" But there was no hesitation in the dog's steps. Daniel rushed after him, swatting aside wet branches, feet slipping on mossy stones. Then he saw it, an overturned wheelbarrow from one of the nearby farms, half buried in mud. Beside it, small footprints. They didn't go toward the trail. They went off the other way, toward the deeper woods. Why? Daniel's stomach twisted. Emily was scared of the woods. He remembered her clinging to her mother's leg during the last town cleanup. "It's dark in there," she had whispered. "It smells like ghosts." So why would she run there? Unless she wasn't running toward something, but away. His thoughts were broken by Shadow's sudden halt. The dog stood at the edge of a sunken ravine, whining softly. Daniel crouched beside him and peered into the ravine. Water pooled at the bottom, slow, dark, full of branches. But it wasn't empty. Something glinted beneath the surface. Plastic? No, it was a child's backpack. Daniel cursed under his breath, climbed down with care, and fished it out. It was heavy. Saturated. But the name written in black marker was unmistakable. Emily. Shadow barked once more, a sharp, focused bark, and took off down the ravine's edge. She had been here. And she was moving. But how far could a 6-year-old go soaked to the bone, with panic in her lungs and floodwater on her heels? Daniel didn't know the answer. But Shadow would find her. He had to. The rain didn't let up. Sheets of it fell like nails from the sky, hammering the tin rooftops of Miller's Creek, washing away footprints, trash, and hope. Daniel's uniform was soaked to the bone, his boots heavy with mud as he jogged beside Shadow, who pulled urgently at the lead. The K9 wasn't sniffing aimlessly, he was tracking something. Or someone. The floodwaters had already claimed 2 blocks, submerging front yards, floating mailboxes, and ripping picket fences from the ground. Cars were tilted at angles, as if drunk on the chaos, their alarms long since drowned. It wasn't a rescue mission anymore, it was a race against time. "Go on, boy," Daniel urged. "Find her." Shadow's nose pressed close to the soggy earth. His ears perked. He stopped. Barked once. Then lunged forward, dragging Daniel down a side alley between 2 houses. Daniel followed, gripping his rifle tight even though this wasn't a combat zone, at least, not officially. But every instinct in him screamed that danger was near. Not the kind with bullets or landmines. The quieter kind. The kind where time was the enemy. They reached a collapsed fence. Beyond it, a yard littered with overturned lawn chairs, a sandbox now just a brown slurry of mud and water. Shadow circled a patch of wet grass, sniffing, then let out a sharp, guttural bark. Daniel dropped to one knee. There, wedged beneath a layer of leaves and broken twigs, a shoe. Tiny. Pink. Glitter still clinging to the strap. Emily's. Daniel felt his pulse spike. He radioed the coordinates, voice tight. This is Delta 2. We have a confirmed clue. Child's shoe, size matches Emily Carter. Copy? Static. Then, copy, Delta 2. Continue tracking. Rescue team en route. Shadow didn't wait. He tore off again, across the back lawn, heading toward the edge of the woods that bordered Miller's Creek. Daniel ran after him, feet slapping through puddles, rain hammering his helmet. And then he heard it. The faintest echo of a voice. Please. He froze. Raised a hand. Shadow stopped. Don't leave. The words were carried on the wind, like a whisper mixed into the rain. Daniel's eyes scanned the tree line. No movement. No figure. Just gray mist and dark trunks swaying in the storm. Emily, he called out. Is that you? Nothing. But Shadow growled. Low. Warning. Then he barked, once, twice, facing a cluster of trees half swallowed by the flood. The water had crept all the way into the lower trunks. A rusted swing set stood half submerged, its chains creaking with every gust. Daniel stepped forward carefully. His boot hit something submerged, a plastic bin, floating just below the surface. And then Shadow lunged forward. Straight into the water. Shadow. Wait. The dog dove beneath a half-fallen tree, claws scraping against bark, teeth snapping at the air. Daniel followed, rifle slung behind him, now wading waist-deep. There it was. A piece of fabric stuck on a branch, yellow with polka dots. A raincoat. Daniel's heart dropped. Another clue. He carefully pulled it free, examining the tear along the sleeve. It matched the one Emily had been wearing in the news photo her mother had shown him. He was close. And if she was alive, she couldn't be far. Shadow barked again, insistent, and began digging at the bank, mud flying behind him in desperate flurries. Good boy, Daniel said, dropping to his knees. We dig. We dig until we find her. The rain wasn't stopping. But neither were they. Daniel scanned the waterlogged field ahead. It was a ruin of what used to be a row of houses, now reduced to tilted rooftops, snapped power lines, and a cold sheet of floodwater. But what caught his eye wasn't the devastation. It was Shadow. The dog had stopped mid-stride, ears high, nose twitching in the air. Then, with a sudden low growl, he veered left, charging toward a muddy slope where the water had receded. Shadow. Daniel called, sloshing behind him through ankle-deep water. What is it, boy? When he caught up, the dog was standing still, rigid, his gaze fixed downward. Daniel followed his line of sight. There they were. Tiny footprints. Too small for an adult. Too steady to be random animal tracks. Children's shoes. One set. They led from the edge of the collapsed footbridge toward the rear of an overturned house, then vanished beneath a patch of thick mud and splintered debris. Daniel crouched beside the prints and studied them. The impressions were shallow but distinct. Not yet washed away. Which meant she was here, Daniel whispered. Shadow whined and scratched at the mud, as if trying to uncover the path she took. Daniel radioed in. This is Sergeant Daniel Mercer. We may have a live trail. Possible child movement through Sector 7. North of the footbridge. The static crackled, followed by a response. Copy that. Need backup? Daniel hesitated. Negative. Not yet. The dog's tracking. If she's close, I don't want to scare her off. He clicked off the radio and turned back to Shadow. "Go," he whispered. "Find her." And Shadow went. They weaved through broken fences and collapsed sheds, following the trail of scattered leaves and bent grass. Every so often, Daniel spotted another clue, a child's mitten half buried in mud, a pink ribbon snagged on a nail. "She's leaving a trail," he murmured. "Intentionally or not." But then they reached the edge of the treeline, and the trail went cold. Shadow paced in circles, nose darting across patches of wet ground, but he stopped near a low mound of debris and let out a deep, urgent bark. Daniel ran up and saw what the dog had found. A little teddy bear, soggy, torn, and trembling in the wind. He picked it up. The tag was still there, Emily. His throat tightened. The name they'd been given on the emergency call-out. The little girl who'd been separated from her parents when the current took her away. She'd been here. "Emily," he called, voice ringing through the woods. Only silence answered. Then, one faint sound. A rustle. A snap of twigs. And something else. A breath. A whisper carried on the wind. "Help!" Daniel spun around, eyes darting, rifle raised but lowered quickly as he scanned. "Emily?" No answer. Shadow barked again, this time running toward a collapsed storm shelter at the base of a tree. Daniel followed, and there, in the faint recess beneath the doorframe, he saw a pair of small, muddy fingers gripping the edge. "Emily, is that you?" he called softly. The fingers recoiled. He dropped to his knees. "It's okay. I'm a soldier. I'm here to help. Your parents are looking for you." A pause. Then, "Where's Shadow?" a small voice whispered. Daniel smiled. "Right here." The dog stepped forward, tail wagging slowly. "See?" Daniel said. "He never gave up on you." There was a soft sob from the shadows. "I was hiding. I thought the water would come back." Daniel reached into the darkness. "It's going down. You're safe now. Take my hand." A pause. Then a tiny hand reached out. Cold. Trembling. But real. He pulled her into the light. Emily. Mud-smeared, soaked, but alive. She looked up at Shadow, and the dog leaned in to lick her cheek. "Good boy," she whispered. Daniel exhaled for the first time in what felt like hours. But this wasn't over. The skies above were still grumbling, and the roads were unstable. They needed to get back. He scooped her up into his arms. "Let's get you home." And together, with Shadow leading the way, they turned back toward the rising wind. Emily's arms wrapped tightly around Daniel's neck as he carried her, her head pressed against his shoulder, wet curls stuck to his uniform. Every few seconds, she would glance behind them, as if the forest still whispered dangers they couldn't see. Shadow trotted ahead, ears up, sniffing, eyes alert. The storm had eased for now, but the wind still tugged at the trees, bending branches, rattling debris along the ground. The flood hadn't won, but it hadn't left either. Daniel's boots squelched through the mud. The radio crackled at his waist. "Mercer, status update." He pressed the receiver. "I have the girl." "Repeat, I have the girl, Emily is safe. We're moving northbound, sheltering toward Ridgeway." "Copy that." "You've got another storm cell tracking fast, ETA 30 minutes. Get somewhere safe." He didn't need the reminder. The sky was already darkening again, and the air had taken on that electric, breathless weight that always came before a surge. Emily whimpered softly. Daniel squeezed her gently. "Almost there, sweetheart." At the base of the next hill, they saw it, a concrete storm shelter built into the slope. It had once belonged to a family farm, long since abandoned, but it stood firm. The door hung slightly open, water-stained but intact. Daniel kicked the door wider, ushering Shadow in first. The interior was damp, but dry enough. Crates lined the back wall, and an old rusted cot lay off to the side. He set Emily down, wrapping her in the emergency thermal blanket from his pack. Shadow lay beside her, head on her lap. "You'll be okay," Daniel said, crouching. "We just need to wait this one out." Then, the wind howled. Daniel stood and slammed the shelter door shut just as a gust hit hard enough to rattle the walls. Thunder rolled so low it vibrated through the concrete. Rain returned in waves, sheets hammering against the roof. Emily jumped. Shadow growled, low and quiet. "It's okay," Daniel reassured them both. "This place has seen worse." He turned on his flashlight and scanned the interior again. Something was off. A chill in the air that wasn't from the storm. A silence beneath the noise. Then, bang. The door shook. Not the wind. Something had hit it. Emily screamed. Shadow leapt to his feet, barking furiously at the door. Daniel's hand went to his sidearm. "Stay behind me." Another bang. He moved slowly to the door, pressed his ear to it, listened. Nothing. Then, scratching. Something heavy sliding. He threw open the hatch, weapon ready. Nothing. Just rain, trees, and wind. But then he saw it. In the mud. Footprints. Big ones. Not boots. Bare feet. Deep impressions. And drag marks. Daniel felt a chill crawl down his spine. He slammed the hatch shut again, bolted it tight. "We're not alone out here." Back inside, Emily sat wide-eyed. "It came to the door before," she whispered. "But it didn't get in." Shadow growled and it left. Daniel stared at her. "You saw it?" She nodded slowly. "What was it?" Emily's voice was barely a whisper. "I don't know, but it wasn't walking right." The shelter groaned again. Water dripped from a crack in the ceiling. Daniel paced in front of the door, flashlight beams slicing through the dark. Shadow didn't sit, he stood guard, muscles tense, ears flicking at every sound. Daniel radioed again. "Sheltered at location near Ridgeway Farm. We have potential unknown presence outside. Requesting check-ins from nearby units. Only static." Then a whisper through the channel. "He's still out here." Daniel froze. "Say again?" "Nothing." Emily looked up. "That's what I heard before." From the trees. Daniel felt a surge of adrenaline. This wasn't just a rescue anymore. This was a survival mission. The storm outside intensified, like it wasn't just raining, but raging. Daniel's ears rang with every boom of thunder, every shriek of wind slicing past the seams of the old storm shelter. But inside, the real storm was the silence between them. Emily didn't ask questions anymore. She just watched the door, her hand tangled in Shadow's fur. The K9 didn't sit, didn't blink. His gaze was pinned to the door like he could hear something Daniel couldn't. Daniel kept the radio close. He flipped through channels, whispering call signs, but the only reply was static. He stepped away from the wall. The concrete felt thinner now. Like the storm wasn't just above them, but pressing in. He shined his flashlight toward the ceiling. That drip from earlier, it had grown. A steady stream now. Water was breaching through. He grabbed a crate, placed it under the leak. Then he froze. Footsteps. Not on the roof. Outside. Sloshing in water. Then, they stopped. Right above them. Shadow growled, ears pulled back. Low. Dangerous. Emily squeezed her eyes shut, whispering something to herself. Daniel slowly unholstered his weapon again. His hands weren't shaking, but his gut twisted with instinct. Something out there wasn't just lost. It was hunting. 10 minutes passed. Nothing. Then came the whisper again, through the radio. "He's still watching." Daniel's breath caught. He hadn't touched the receiver. Shadow barked sharply, lunging toward the door. Something slammed the shelter again. Harder this time. Metal creaked. Emily screamed. Daniel aimed the flashlight through the reinforced slit in the door. For a second, just a second, he saw a face. Pale. Hollow eyes. Mud-crusted hair. And then, gone. Daniel knew this wasn't just fear talking. Something was out there. And it wasn't just watching. It was waiting. He turned back to Emily. "Listen to me. No matter what happens, you stay close to Shadow. He'll protect you. Do you understand?" She nodded, trembling. He handed her a spare flashlight and showed her how to use it. "If the power goes out, don't panic. Follow Shadow. Always follow Shadow." Shadow stood by the door, tail stiff, ready to launch. Then, another bang. And this time, it wasn't just one. There were two sets of hands now. Scraping. Pushing. Trying to lift the hatch. Daniel braced it with his back. Whatever was out there, it was not human anymore. Suddenly, silence. Total silence. The wind stopped. The rain stopped. No thunder. No howling. Daniel's heartbeat was the only sound he could hear. Then the hatch creaked again. But it wasn't being pushed now. It was being opened. From the outside. Daniel drew his sidearm. "Shadow. Guard." Shadow growled, leapt in front of Emily. And then, a voice. Soft. Female. Familiar. "Emily? Sweetheart, it's me. It's Mommy." Emily stood. "Mommy?" Daniel's arm shot out. "Don't. That's not her. But it's her voice. That thing, whatever it is, it mimics. It used my comms. It's using her voice now." Emily froze. Then the voice again, a little more urgent. "Open the door, baby. Mommy's cold. I'm wet, please let me in." Daniel looked through the slit. No one. Just the storm. But the voice kept coming. Closer. Softer. "Let me in. I'm scared." Shadow snapped at the door. A sound Daniel had never heard from him before. Not fear. Not warning. Rage. Daniel stepped forward and whispered, "You're not her. And you're not coming in." The voice stopped. Then a growl, low, animalistic, rasped through the keyhole. It wasn't a voice anymore. Suddenly, pounding again, furious. The door held, but it wouldn't for long. Daniel turned. "We have to move. There's a second hatch, an exit tunnel on the other side. Old farm shelters always have one." He grabbed Emily, signaled Shadow, and ran to the back. The tunnel was narrow, half-flooded, rusted and dark. But it was a way out. As they slipped in, Shadow took rear guard. The pounding behind them got louder, closer, followed by laughter. High-pitched. Distorted. They didn't look back. They emerged into the forest, drenched, gasping. Emily collapsed into Daniel's arms. Shadow stood alert, scanning the woods. Daniel checked the map. "We're 3 miles from the Ridgeway evac zone. We move now, or we don't make it." The wind howled again. But this time, it was different. It sounded like breathing. And it was right behind them. The forest was a wall of black. Rain sheeted down from the treetops, hammering leaves, flooding animal trails, and turning the earth into shifting, sucking mud. Daniel's boots sank with every step. Behind him, Emily gripped his vest tightly, her tiny fingers trembling against his soaked uniform. Shadow moved ahead, ears pinned, body low, sniffing, scanning, guarding. Daniel's compass bounced in his palm. 2 miles, he muttered. Ridgeway's northwest, past the creek. We stick to cover. They moved under a broken canopy, using the remnants of old hunting paths and deer tracks to avoid deeper terrain. But the forest wasn't quiet. Far behind them, they could still hear something. It wasn't chasing, not directly, but it was following. Watching. And waiting. Daniel paused, raised his fist. Shadow froze. Emily clung tighter. Up ahead, past a split oak tree, a red glow shimmered through the branches. Not fire. Not natural. Daniel ducked. Down. They waited, breath fogging the cold air. Then a shape passed through the light. Humanoid, but not human. It moved too smooth. Too quiet. Its joints didn't bend correctly. It paused, sniffed the air, and kept moving the other way. Emily whispered, "Is it gone?" Daniel didn't answer. He just motioned silently. Keep moving. Half a mile in. The trail bent around a rocky ravine. Trees thinned. The rain lightened. Then they saw it. A wooden bridge, nearly collapsed, sagging over a flash-flooded stream. One side hung broken. The planks danced in the wind. Daniel cursed under his breath. Shadow growled, not at the bridge, but at the other side. A flicker of movement. Someone, standing there? A man? No. The shape was wrong. Arms too long. Head tilted backward like it was sniffing the sky. It turned, slowly, and vanished into the brush. Daniel's instincts screamed. We don't cross that bridge. We go downstream. But it's shorter, Emily protested. We're tired. Shadow barked once. Short. Sharp. Daniel trusted him. They descended into the ravine instead, where the water was waist-deep and bitter cold. Emily whimpered, clinging to Daniel's neck as he waded through with her above the current. Shadow swam beside them. On the far bank, they climbed out, panting. The bridge above them collapsed as they reached the top. If they'd crossed, they'd be gone. 1 mile left. Lightning cracked, illuminating the twisted silhouettes of broken trees and half-sunken cars. This part of the forest had been flooded earlier in the storm. Abandoned signs pointed to Old Ridgeway Road, barely legible now. Daniel knelt, checked the compass. Almost there. Emily's lip quivered. I can't feel my feet. We're close, Daniel said gently. Just a little farther. Then came a sound that nearly made his blood freeze. A scream, distant but clear. A child's scream. Emily gasped. That wasn't me. Shadow turned, not toward the scream, but back the way they came. His hackles were up again. Daniel whispered, It's trying to pull us back. Why does it sound like me? He didn't answer. They pressed forward, climbing the last ridge. The wind picked up again, and through the swaying trees, Daniel saw them. Headlights. Military jeeps. The Ridgeway checkpoint, barely standing, but there. Daniel dropped to a crouch. Stay low. If it's real, they'll have motion sensors. We can't risk drawing that thing to them. Shadow crept ahead first, nose twitching. He stopped once, growled, then sprinted forward. It was real. Daniel carried Emily into the open. Soldiers saw him. Weapons raised, then lowered. Medic, someone yelled. We've got survivors. Floodlights cut through the trees. Arms reached for Emily. Daniel collapsed to his knees, exhausted, soaked, eyes still darting to the woods. But Shadow wasn't relaxing. He stood at the tree-line, staring back into the forest. Watching. Because something else had followed. The relief at Ridgeway was short-lived. Emily was quickly wrapped in a dry thermal blanket, her lips blue but her grip on Daniel's sleeve unshakable. Medics checked her pulse, took her temperature, and tried to pry her away gently. She didn't let go. "I want the dog," she whispered. Shadow remained by her side, eyes locked on the woods, tail low but rigid. Not wagging. Not relaxed. Guarding. Daniel stood, muscles aching, as Major Keller approached through the mud, his radio buzzing with static. His brow furrowed when he saw Daniel's face. "You made it," Keller said, voice gruff with restrained emotion. "We lost contact hours ago." Daniel nodded, but didn't smile. "There's something in those woods." Keller looked past him. "We've seen shapes. Half our team refuses to go back out after dark. They say it mimics voices." Daniel's jaw clenched. It screamed Emily's name, using her own voice. "But she was with me." Keller didn't ask for clarification. He just handed Daniel a thermos. "Debrief in 20. But Daniel didn't go to the mess tent. He went back to the fence, where Shadow still stood, unmoving, staring into the trees. It wasn't over. The storm had moved on, but the air was colder than it should have been. Daniel followed Shadow's gaze. Beyond the fence, the woods shifted unnaturally, as though the trees breathed. Then he saw it again. A shape between the trunks. Lank. Lurking. Familiar. Emily's silhouette. But Emily was asleep, inside a warm tent, holding Shadow's old collar like a teddy bear. And yet the figure in the woods moved just like her. Same height. Same hair. It raised a hand slowly, and pointed at Daniel. He didn't blink. Didn't move. Then the figure dissolved, blinked out of existence, like a mirage. Shadow growled softly. Daniel whispered, "It's not just a flood survivor, is it?" The air around them suddenly stilled. No insects. No birds. No sound. Only the faint creak of wood and drip of water. Then Keller's voice crackled through the walkie. "Daniel. You might want to get back here. Now." Inside the tent. Emily had woken up screaming. She pointed at the roof of the tent. He was here. Inside. But there was nothing there. The guards outside hadn't seen a thing. Yet when Daniel examined the inside of the tent flap, he found muddy prints. From inside. Smaller than a man's. Too large for a child. Shadow growled again. Not at the ground, but at the roof of the tent. Daniel stepped back slowly. "It's mimicking her." Keller was grim. "We evacuated every civilian from this region 3 days ago. But 2 teams never came back." Daniel's throat went dry. "Where?" "The ridge. Right before the flood. Last GPS ping was 300 yards south of that barn you came from." Daniel closed his eyes. The barn. The whispers. The water wasn't the only thing hiding in that place. The decision. That night, Daniel stayed awake, rifle beside him, Shadow at his feet. Emily slept restlessly, clutching a stuffed dog the medic gave her. But at 3:17 a.m., she sat up suddenly. And stared at the tent flap. "Don't open it," she said softly. Daniel rose. "Why?" She didn't blink. "Because it's not me." Daniel's hand moved to the zipper slowly. Outside, in the dark, a child's voice whimpered, "Please, I'm cold." Daniel said nothing. Shadow growled, low and deep. Then the voice repeated. This time, perfectly matching Emily's voice. "Please take me home." But Emily was inside. Daniel's heart pounded. Then the zipper moved, on its own, just a few inches. He raised his weapon. "Show yourself." Silence. Then footsteps, running, back into the woods. But no body. No heat signature on the infrared. Nothing human. And that's when Daniel understood. This wasn't just a rescue mission. This was a hunt, and they were still being hunted. Dawn didn't bring light. It brought fog. Thick. Suffocating. The kind that pressed against your eyes and ears and refused to lift. The Ridgeway base looked more like a ghost town than a rescue outpost. Radios crackled with static. Drones malfunctioned mid-flight. Keller's men whispered about hallucinations. But Daniel wasn't hallucinating. Neither was Shadow. They knew exactly where they had to go next. Back to the barn. Return to the origin. Emily had stopped speaking entirely. She drew with a charcoal stub on scraps of paper, always the same thing. A crooked barn. A face in the rafters. Eyes where no child's eyes should be. She hadn't been inside that long, but something stayed with her. Something no shower or blanket could remove. Daniel pulled Keller aside. "We need to search it again. Thoroughly. Not just for survivors, for whatever else is hiding there." Keller frowned. "It's on the edge of the flood zone. Stability's bad. That roof could collapse." Daniel locked eyes with him. "That's not the roof I'm worried about." Shadow barked once, short, urgent. Permission was given. Daniel, Shadow, and 2 soldiers boarded an ATV and headed east. Emily's drawing gripped tight in his hand. The reeking silence. They reached the barn in silence. Half buried in mud, the structure leaned unnaturally, as if resisting collapse out of sheer bitterness. One side sagged where floodwaters had sheared off the lower boards. The front doors were open, just like before. But now, it smelled different. Not mold. Decay. Shadow hesitated at the threshold. Then he growled, not a warning, but a command. "Go slow." Inside, Daniel scanned the space. Hay scattered. Crates splintered. Chains hanging from the rafters. The ladder Emily had mentioned lay in 2 pieces on the floor, snapped like dry bones. But what made Daniel stop cold was the new set of footprints in the mud. Not boots. Bare feet. Large. Inhumanly long. And they didn't lead out. They led deeper. The trapdoor. Shadow dug again, just like before. But not in the corner. In the center of the barn, beneath the hanging chains, his paws scraped at the floorboards with frenzied determination. Daniel dropped to his knees, brushing away muck until he found it. A trapdoor. Unlatched. Slightly open. Daniel pulled it wide. A pitch-black hole yawned beneath them. A narrow, wooden staircase descended into wet, cold earth. One soldier swore under his breath. "Nope. No way. I saw this in a horror movie once." The other whispered, "Why build a cellar in a barn that never stored anything?" Daniel didn't answer. He clicked on his flashlight. Shadow led the way. They descended. The real cellar. It was too deep. The stairs went farther than any normal storm shelter. The walls were stone, not wood. The air smelled like rust and salt. And then they saw it. Names. Carved into the stone walls. Hundreds of them. Children's names. Emily's was there. So was a boy named Caleb, who'd vanished from the town 6 years ago. A girl named Tessa, missing since 2003. All children who'd gone missing after storms. All last seen near this part of town. One soldier whispered, "This isn't a cellar. It's a grave." But there were no bodies. Just dolls. Shoes. Drawings pinned with nails. A broken recorder that clicked, and then played a whisper. "I'm still here." Shadow's hackles rose. Daniel turned. Something was at the base of the stairs. But it wasn't blocking their path. It was watching. What the flood didn't wash away. The figure was tall, cloaked in dripping darkness, with a face that rearranged itself, first Emily, then Daniel, then Keller. It opened its mouth. And barked. Perfectly. Like Shadow. Shadow lunged. Daniel screamed, "Shadow, no!" But the K9 bit into the thing's leg. It didn't flinch. Just smiled. The flashlight flickered. The room went black. There was a scream, not Shadow's, not Daniel's. When the light returned, the figure was gone. So was one of the soldiers. Only his boots remained. Shadow returned, mouth foaming slightly, but alive. Daniel whispered, "We're leaving. Now." The names on the walls had started to bleed. They didn't talk on the ride back. Not a word. Mud clung to their boots. One soldier stared blankly ahead, still shaking. Daniel kept glancing at Shadow, who remained oddly calm, eyes fixed on the road, as if watching something only he could see. Emily was waiting at the base camp. The moment she saw them, she dropped the crayon she was holding. "Did you see him?" she whispered. Daniel knelt in front of her. "Emily, who?" She leaned close, breath soft as mist. "The man who follows the floods." Her hand trembled as she lifted a scrap of paper. It showed the barn. And something underneath it, arms reaching from the ground, surrounding a child, and a dog holding them off. One name too many. The base was chaos. Satellite footage revealed something disturbing. The barn's entire foundation had shifted during the flood, rotated 90 degrees, as if realigning with something underground. Keller reviewed the footage with a pale face. "That's not natural." Neither were the disappearances. For new calls had come in overnight, missing children. Always after heavy rain. Always near structures that, like the barn, had been abandoned for decades. Daniel stared at a map. The names Emily drew matched locations from older floods. One line connected them all, an arc spanning miles. At its center, a blank patch of forest no one could account for. Shadow whined. His nose pressed to the map. Right on the center. Right where the next flood was predicted to hit. The Whisper Network. They brought in analysts. Psychologists. Even a priest. But none of them could explain what Emily, or Shadow, or Daniel had experienced. One woman, a linguist from MIT, listened to the recorded whisper from the barn's basement. She analyzed it for hours. Then she packed her bag, pale and shaking. "It's not English," she said. "It's older. It's not saying I'm still here. It's saying, I never left." And Shadow began barking at the cellar recording every time it played. Not aggressively. Warning. Like he'd heard it before. Like he'd heard it in every flood rescue they'd ever done. The pattern beneath the water. Daniel didn't sleep. He sat with Emily at night, listening to her talk in her dreams. Sometimes she spoke in different voices. A man. A girl. A growl. A whisper. The base's dogs grew restless. Some refused to go near the barn again. But Shadow. He kept digging. First behind the mess hall. Then by the trucks. Then by the field tents. Always near wet soil. Always where old roots twisted up like fingers. As if something beneath was listening. Or waking. Daniel finally asked Keller, How long have strange things happened after these floods? Keller hesitated. Longer than you've been in uniform. The final warning. On the 7th night after the barn search, the rain returned. Not a storm. A silence. The air thickened. Radios cut out. Cameras went fuzzy. And from the woods, Emily screamed. By the time they found her, she was curled at the edge of the clearing. Mud-covered. Eyes shut. Whispering. He wants the ones who can hear. That's why the dog hears first. That's why they bark before we do. That's why the flood comes. She looked up at Daniel. It's not just water. She touched his chest. It's a test. And your dog always knew. What Daniel saw. That night, Shadow stood at the porch. Still. Staring into the trees. Daniel joined him. Lightning flashed. For a split second, Daniel saw something between the trees. Not a man. Not a beast. A shadow with eyes. It nodded once. Slowly. Shadow didn't bark. He just stepped forward. And stopped. Waiting. Watching. Daniel placed his hand on the dog's back. And whispered, "We're not done yet."